Alex Sammon back on the show, politics writer at Slate. Alex, thanks so much for coming on.
Hey, yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Of course. So you're here to explain this insanity in New York. Yesterday, Hochul's nominee for chief judge of the Court of Appeals in New York was actually rejected by the state Senate Judiciary Committee, 10-9. So very close margins there. And this is the latest development in this saga that ranges from head scratching on one end to infuriating on the other. I'm not sure which. We can just go with both. Why not both? But let's start from the beginning. How did Hochul get to this point, nominating this judge who has an anti-labor record, anti-abortion record, Hector LaSalle, to be the top judge in New York State, a solidly blue state?
Yeah, well, it kind of starts with the chief judge of the Court of Appeals. That's the top court in New York, Janet Difiore, who is a true dyed-in-the-wool Cuomo loyalist. She's announced that she was stepping down, I think in August of 2022. So that was kind of a surprise. Her term was not over. It was, she was the subject of an ethics investigation and promptly decided to step aside. So she was the head of this conservative bloc on the court. There was a 4-3 conservative bloc. She steps aside. It's a huge opportunity for Hochul. I mean, it was one of those things. It was like an incredible windfall, totally unexpected, and a chance for her to turn the page on the Cuomo era, to recalibrate New York politics and kind of reset this conservative majority on the state's top court.
And can I just stop you right there, Alex? Like the reason that court was conservative was because of Cuomo's self-dealing and a variety of other favors that he had done, and it set up the electoral disaster for New York Democrats in this election cycle.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so that court, stacked with Cuomo appointees, no surprise, very conservative, loyal to him. I mean, it's the sort of the nexus of both conservative and sort of beholden to his personal dealings. And right, they were the ones who voted down the redistricting that Democrats in the Senate had put together, and then handed over that responsibility to an out-of-state independent commissioner, which of course gave Republicans a huge advantage. That was the state court all the way, or the appeals court all the way. And that's something that really brought a lot of attention to this court. I think, part of the reason it's surprising maybe that we're even talking about this. Part of the reason we're talking about this is because that was such a disastrous outcome. It was such a crushing blow to Democrats in New York and nationally that the court became, an object of a lot of attention, a lot of scrutiny. And that's a recent change. When Cuomo was stacking the court in the first place, there wasn't a lot of pressure or pushback.
So, right, exactly. And now it's had ramifications, and that's what makes it even more shocking that the new leader of the Democrats in the House, despite this directly leading to Democrats losing seats in the House, you could potentially pin them losing the majority on it, given how terrible the results were in New York State. Despite that, Hakeem Jeffries has gone to bat for this nominee, Hector LaSalle, alongside Kathy Hochul. So who is this guy? What is his record? Why are progressives upset about it? And if you don't mind just expanding on that.
Yeah, totally. It's like one of those decisions that's so confounding, especially after this election cycle. It's like New York Democrats have not just learned nothing, they've learned less than nothing. So LaSalle, so Hochul has recommended a slate of 7 possible nominees. There's a commission that has to recommend a handful of judges for this position to her, and she picks from one of them. So she got 7 of them. And among the nominees were a handful of I think, really extremely qualified judges, people who have a record in New York, come from backgrounds that you consider diverse, professionally diverse, which is something that the Biden administration has really championed. And she picks Hector LaSalle. And I think if you want to be the most charitable to her, you would say, well, she picked LaSalle because there's a lack of Latino representation at the highest echelons of power in New York. She wanted to do something about that. But that's pretty much where I think the charity ends, because, of course, if you did any vetting at all, you would have quickly found out that he was involved in a handful of decisions that were going to infuriate the most important constituencies in Democratic politics in New York. And I should say that Hochul has a history of being very, very bad at vetting. It's her lieutenant governor when she took over for Cuomo, her second in command, Brian Benjamin, was someone who a lot of people said you got to be careful about. Like, there are rumors about him, and then 9 months later there was there were charges brought against him by the federal government, and he had to step down. And it's just one of these things where it's like their ideology is something, and I wouldn't be surprised if she wanted a right wing or fairly right wing court just like Cuomo had. But at the same time, it's like her vetting process has been called into question more than once, and I think that there are these handful of decisions I think we'll probably talk about in greater detail that were obviously going to be huge problems for New Yorker, for Democratic New Yorkers, and not even just for progressives, for pretty moderate groups that are behind things like organized labor and women's health and criminal justice reform.
If you don't mind, just talking a bit about those cases in particular. There's also he had this inexplicable record when he signed off on this on dismissing jurors based on their skin color as well. That's just one element, but his record is basically pretty sparse, except for some of these extreme examples that I'm sure you can dive into.
Right. So what was interesting in the hearing that we saw yesterday was, despite LaSalle is a high-ranking judge, he hasn't written a ton of opinions. So there actually isn't a lot out there to judge him on. But what we do have to judge him on, and what the Senate Judiciary Committee had to judge him on, is like a handful of really alarming decisions. And so one of them, as you mentioned, it was brought up repeatedly in these hearings, was this decision where a prosecutor pushed to throw out potential jurors on the basis that they were dark-skinned. And LaSalle basically blessed that decision and found that dark-skinned was not a protected group in the Constitution, that it didn't rise to the level of constitutional protections against discrimination based on race or anything else, which is obviously wild. And of course, the Court of Appeals, which he's trying to get onto, overturned that immediately because it was so glaring and ridiculous. So that was one thing that criminal justice advocates were, totally galled by. The next case that came up a lot was this case, shorthand is called Cablevision, and it was a decision that he gave that was a devastating blow for organized labor, because it basically allowed companies to sue labor organizers for being critical of the company. And so, it just blows a massive hole in the protections that exist for organizers to court new union chapters and to set up union drives. And this was another one that, like, organized labor right away was like, this was a horrible decision for us. It was catastrophic, and there's just no way that we can get behind that. And that was, a huge blow for this nominee as well, because once organized, it's one thing for the DSA adjacent state senators in New York to say, well, we don't support someone who has this record on racial justice, who has this record on various other things. It's another thing for the state's unions to say, look, there's absolutely no way we're doing this. And they came out pretty quickly, which gives you a sense that Hochul very likely never even called them and said, hey, what do you think about this? Because the day that the announcement dropped, they were out saying that we're not behind this, and we won't be, which gives you a sense of just how poorly managed this whole thing was.
Yeah, she's just not a good politician. I mean, that's a huge miscalculation. And say what you want about Andrew Cuomo, we could say a lot, right? At the very least, he knew which I was gonna say palms to grease, but that's a mixing of metaphors, I guess, right? Or is that correct?
No, I think that's right.
He knew which.
It's correct. It's like, right,
Yeah.
he did all sorts of, his dealings are obviously infamous and well known at this point, but he didn't lose a lot of these. He didn't go on these bullying sprees and these vengeance campaigns and do this horse trading and stuff and come away with nothing. He won those fights if he decided to get into them. And so that's actually, I think, a really interesting point of comparison is, we don't really know who Hochul is because she hasn't been in the spotlight very long. She just got elected for the first time a couple months ago, and barely at that. We haven't seen her in action. And this is the first time where she's like really tried to use political capital to get something she wanted. Why it's something she wanted, we have no idea.
Well, that's what I want to ask you next. It's like, what the hell is this? What's the point? I mean, it's almost like she's trying to do certain the Cuomo politics, right? But there was always kind of an end to Cuomo's politics, which is solidifying his own powers. That simple? And she's just bad at it? I mean, this is conjecture, I know, but what's your sense of why the hell she's doing this?
Yeah, I guess I can sort of give you a best guess based on all the conversations I've had with people involved in the process. And I think it's a combination of things. I think that, yeah, right. Cuomo had this thing which was shoring up his own power by any means necessary. That's something of an ideology in itself. And I don't think Hochul really has a strong ideology. I think that she made this pick. I think that the fact that it was someone who was a little bit more conservative was probably preferable for her. And then I think she didn't do a lot of vetting. And when she got crossed by a bunch of senators, in effect, and labor groups and everyone else who said this is a terrible pick that we won't support, I think that she tried to pick up the old Cuomo playbook and say, I'm going to force this through. You better not cross me. And the sort of like willingness to battle with the left in New York State is, that's the go-to Cuomo approach. And I think she learned a lot of those things from her old boss. I don't know why she wouldn't have. But you see it exactly. It's like in that hearing, the Republicans were praising LaSalle for his character and his hard work and his like willingness to accept this incredibly important position. And almost every Democrat, except for 2 or 3, were very hostile to him. And this is a nominee by a Democratic governor. I mean, it was like one of those things you would never know unless you've been reading about it, what was going on. And I think that, yeah, I think that Hochul kind of went back to the Cuomo playbook and was like, all right, we'd rather fight the left than fight the right. We are going to use these tactics that Cuomo became so infamous for to ram this thing through. And the problem is that I don't think she has the muscle. I mean, we can see it now, obviously, based on the result, but she doesn't have the muscle to do it because she doesn't have a lot of political capital built up.
She doesn't have the IDC. I mean, that was for people that might not know what that is. That was a caucus of Democrats who basically Cuomo relied upon to stamp out any progressive legislation because they voted with Republicans basically all the time in exchange for personal favors and power. And since really, I think Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and like Trump also elevating the level of political consciousness in the country, New York State galvanized with the help of DSA, which has been, very successful in New York State, getting progressives in those seats and ousting the IDC. And you see the tangible results right now, right here, with the pushback internally in the Senate and also the vote, which shot him down in the Judiciary Committee. However, though, that might not be the end of the fight, right, Alex?
Right, absolutely. So Hochul has already said that this hearing was unfair and that she was willing to sue the Democratic caucus in the Senate to override this decision and to get LaSalle to a full Senate vote. And she's actually retained counsel to do it. So, it's a shocking move because, right, you'd say, okay, Hochul barely won her election campaign. She won by 5 points in New York, where, Democrats, registered Democrats outnumber registered Republicans 2-1 in the state. So that's a horrible performance. And, a lot of people in New York politics would say that she dragged them down the ballot. Like if you were a state senator or a legislator or anybody else, you would say, well, it was almost impossible to run with Hochul at the top of the ticket because she was such a bad candidate and she hurt everyone. So already the party is feeling like we don't owe Hochul anything. If anything, she owes us. And then she picks someone that they don't want. And they didn't want this fight, to be fair. Like the state Senate, Democrats in the state Senate didn't want this. They weren't saying like, bring it on. We're going to show Hochul who runs this show. They were like, please pick somebody else. Like just withdraw the pick and pick somebody else. And she wouldn't do it. And so now she's threatening to sue them. And it seems like that's a pretty legitimate threat. I mean, there's been plenty of indications that she feels like this is a legitimate course of action that she may well pursue. And again, it's like, do we think that she has enough votes in the broader Senate to get this nominee through? I don't think so. I mean, I've just a quick count. I don't see the math there either. And so it's one of these things where it's like, the simplest, like almost you would say like the most sort of, I'd say corrupt, but the sort of like horse trading measure of politics here would be like, okay, I got elected because these, women's groups and organized labor put a lot of effort into getting me across the finish line, and I barely survived. I should do them a solid by giving them their nominee. I mean, this is kind of how you'd think like politics works, generally speaking. And Hochul instead does the exact opposite, where these groups do, save her political skin, and then she turns around and picks the one person that they want less than anyone, and then is willing just to fight them to the absolute death over it. And again, it's like, I don't know. I don't have an explanation for that.
Well, then what's your explanation for Hakeem Jeffries coming to the rescue on this front? Because we know he hates the left, right? That's why he's in the position he is. That's why he's probably going to be the speaker or the Democratic leader in the House for the next few decades. And he has the capacity to fundraise a lot. That's a prerequisite for that kind of position. So he recently started a pact with Josh Gottheimer and others in order to ensure that leftists in primaries would not win. So that's his ideology. And she, as I mentioned earlier, despite the fact that the New York State Supreme Court, you can draw a direct line to electoral losses for Democrats in the House on the federal level, he has come to the rescue and has decided to throw his weight behind LaSalle and Hochul's effort here. What's your read on the calculus behind that? Is it just an anti-left thing, or is there something more broad that's happening here?
It's a really good question. It's one of these things, again, where it's like, if these people would just do what was best for themselves, it would make so much more sense and it would actually work better.
Right.
But again, what does Jeffries have to win from this? I can't see anything. I mean, already the math, you and I and everybody else could count with 14 state senators in the Democratic Party saying that they weren't going to support LaSalle. That meant that he had to get Republican votes to get confirmed. So already, the calculus is simple for Jeffries to jump in on this, this like charm offensive that Hochul went on last weekend, which was, she was up in the Bronx rallying on LaSalle's behalf, and Jeffries spoke as part of that. And then she went to Sunset Park in Brooklyn and was, invoking Martin Luther King to justify the nomination of LaSalle. And, it's just like the whole thing was so incredibly misguided. And why would Hakeem Jeffries jump in on that? Like, why was that something he felt like he couldn't miss? I wonder. I mean, I think that, this is something like old habits die hard, where, in the old New York Democratic Party, this would make sense. This is something that he would love to participate in, in the past. And certainly when he was, more sort of intimately involved in New York machine politics.
Right.
But as the highest ranking Democrat in the House, especially, the Biden administration has really championed these sort of more left-wing, non-prosecutorial
That's the thing. Biden's
right.
breaking records in nominating judges, and we're talking about how Republicans want to steal elections and their threats to democracy, and the leader of the Democrats in the House is rallying for a conservative nominee for the New York Court of Appeals top position to switch a majority. Right now it's 3-3. This would make it 4-3 conservative. It is mind-blowing. It's mind-blowing.
It's totally crazy. And again, just on a very sort of like constituent services level, like the whole thing that the Democrats have been talking about since Hakeem took over was, this is unity. Like, we're all on the same page. Like, a woman's right to choose is not up for question.
That
like,
too.
We support labor like more than we ever have. These sorts of things were supposed to be like, these are unanimous. We've decided on these principles. They're non-fungible. This is the Democratic Party. And compared to the Republican Party, which is riven with, discontent and all these ideological factions, like, here we are. And we overperformed in November because of our commitment to these things. And then, 2 months later, like that, it's actually a huge problem for him too, because right, these major women's groups, like, these aren't small groups that were saying that we can't support LaSalle. These were major national groups. And so what are they thinking when they see him rally for LaSalle after they specifically said, not this candidate, please pick another candidate? It actually is really threatening for the whole Democratic caucus at a higher level than just New York. And that's another thing where, this sort of statewide ineptitude that we've seen from the party is not just a statewide issue. It's absolutely a national issue. And beyond even just the fact that, Jeffries might be Speaker Jeffries if the New York Democratic Party got its act together, not just Leader Jeffries. But But again, I don't know. There are certain ways of being that are hard to, or certain patterns that are hard to break. I think that was an example of that where, you know, I think Hochul called in favor. He probably thought that this was the sort of thing that he's done a million times and it shouldn't be that big of a deal. And I don't know if he was counting the votes or what, but not a great look.
Definitely not. Well, Alex, I really appreciate your time coming on explaining this to us, even though there are a lot of questions, still more questions than answers. Although, oftentimes it's like you could just draw this back to incompetence. But in this case, I feel like there's a lot of unanswered stuff about corruption, stuff we don't know about deals made behind the scenes that hopefully will come to light soon. Alex Sammon, politics writer at Slate, thanks so much for your time. And you can read, I tweeted it out, but he has a great piece kind of detailing the whole saga that just came out yesterday, right?
Yeah, that's right.
At Slate. So check that out. Thanks so much, Alex.
Thanks so much.